In this video, we're going to be talking about stereo width and how we can use it to make more interesting, wider bass sounds without sacrificing mono compatibility. First off, it's a good idea to set up a way for you to monitor stereo width and be able to hear it on its own so that you really train your ear to understand what it is. Really simply, what stereo width is, it's the difference between the left and the right speaker on a stereo setup. To give you an example of this, let's use this serum patch, which is a simple bass sound. I've got a spectrum analyzer here, which is set up to show both the mono signal and the side signal, so the difference between the left and right. And you'll see the left and right, or just the difference signal, represented as a lighter green underlay of the frequency spectrum. When it boosts above the volume of the mono signal, it will show as red. So if I just play a note here. So you can see here that you've got the mono signal, and then under that, just a little bit quieter, is the side signal. So that's the visual representation of it. Going into how that sounds, I'm going to use a Pro Q3. I'm just going to set up a band here, change this to just side. So now this is just boosting or cutting the side signal, so the difference between the left and right. Now what I can do is I can solo this to make it very obvious what just the side sounds like. If I unsolo, if I solo again, so you can hear that difference as a major difference, that especially in the fundamental, you can't hear the fundamental as strongly, and it's really weighted to the mids and highs. That's where the side content is the strongest, at least for this sound. In terms of how we hear side information, we actually hear it strongest from around, I think it's from around 200, 300 to about 1K. That's where we hear the difference between the left and right most naturally. So it would be emphasized there. And then you would need stronger boosts in the high end to achieve the same kind of width result, at least in theory. And this kind of depends on each sound. While you're creating it, you kind of need to play with it and see what feels right. Now that we've gone over how to hear and see side information, we can start experimenting with how to create width in your sounds. So I'm going to create a completely new patch to show you how this works. So here we've just got a simple saw wave. You can see there's no side information at all. Now what you can do, the first kind of simplest way to create width is to add unison. And unison really is just, if I show you here, it's adding another version of that wave, and it's detuning it, and it's spreading those two detuned saw waves apart in the in the stereo width, so it will sound louder. And you can detune them even further, and it will get wider and wider. Now you can see that both signals are essentially equal. We've got very wide sound because we've only got two unisons. If we add a third, what we should see is that the mono signal is a bit stronger. See how the mono signal is just a little bit stronger than the side information now, because what it's done, if I show you on the detune, it's created this central harmonic that's not detuned, and the other two are moving left and right and detuning and creating phase. So they're phasing in and out now with each other. This phase can cause some issues, especially in the low end. So when you have two waves phasing, this shapes, there we go. So when it's just one, We have that very solid fundamental just coming through on the middle. So there's no side information. If we add that second, if we add two unison, essentially, you'll see the same results before. But you also see that there's this oscillation starting to happen. And that's because the two waves are cancelling each other out. So why is that a problem? When tracks are mastered, especially in electronic music, often the mastering engineer, they will just cut all of the side content below anything from 100 to 300 hertz. If I take this, change it to be the low cut, and if I cut everything up to 300 in the side, this should remove most of the side content below 300 hertz. What you'll see now is that we have a very different movement in terms of volume happening in the low end. So that is a very simplified look at phase cancellation and how it can cause you issues, especially when you have very complex bass relationships between multiple different tracks and all these things happening and stacking up on each other. You may end up in your mix finding that some bass sounds don't have as much power as others, or the same bass sound doesn't have as much power in one part compared to another part. It's good to just be aware of this kind of phenomenon when you're making new sounds. I have a method for kind of avoiding that, and it goes straight from very basics of sound design, like when you're creating the sound, being aware of what you're actually doing with the low end of the sound.